I have 2-year-old twins. I'm a former teacher turned stay-at-home mom, and I plan to use what I have been through and have overcome physically and emotionally to someday help other mamas. My name is Alyssa Grundon, and I am a miraculous mama.
Welcome back to Miraculous Mamas. I'm your host, Elizabeth Joy. Don't forget to check out the Miraculous Mamas Patreon, where we have more birth stories with these amazing women who are doing these awesome intros for us. Just the birth stories from the women in our community, and they're all a part of our Facebook group too. So make sure that you join that just to be in community with us as we learn and grow and love on each other. Here at Miraculous Mamas, we believe in empowering women through storytelling and education. We love people to come on and share their stories of where they've been, where they're going, what got them through hard times, how they celebrate the good times. And we love being able to learn and celebrate with them and bringing on educators that can help us grow and learn and better ourselves and to just expand our minds. And I'm so excited, you guys, about today's episode. I have on Lisa Hendrickson-Jack, and she's a fertility expert. So she is an author, a podcaster, a specialist, and I actually found her podcast and fell in love with it. And she helps women understand their cycles and learn how to understand their bodies, their fertility, what their bodies are telling them through their fertility, and what fertility means and what it looks like and what your cycle is telling you. Your cycle, your menstrual cycle tells you so much about your health, your body, where you're at, and it's often just kind of overlooked. So I'm super excited to have her on. We also talk about sex in this episode. We talk about conception. And for those of you listening with little ones, we talk about things that I'm not sure you want their ears to hear. Nothing bad, but condoms, birth control, conception, ejaculation, things like that are in this episode. So if you don't want them to hear, then maybe listen to this with headphones on. But yeah, I'm super excited that she is here. Because she just has so much information to offer. She's a mom herself and has been doing this work for a long, long time. So I'm going to get her on. All right, everyone, I have Lisa Hendrickson-Jack here, and I'm so excited because she is going to talk to us about fertility. And she has an awesome podcast called Fertility Friday, and she's going to talk with us today about preparing for pregnancy, what your fifth vital sign is. She's an author and just a bad A woman. So we're so excited that you are here. Thanks for taking the time to come on and talk with us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. We were chatting in the pre-chat, so now I'm super excited to dive into everything.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself before we dive in?
Sure. I've been teaching women to chart their cycles using fertility awareness for almost 20 years. I have an interesting experience because I discovered fertility awareness and how the menstrual cycle works and the connection between your cycles and overall health when I was really young. So I was about 18 or 19 years old, just out of high school. I often joke that it was my post-high school feminist phase and I was learning all this really cool stuff. But it just so happened that on my university campus, there was we had a women's center and they would bring in all these cool speakers. There was a group of women, some of whom were already, trained educators, others who were training, who held monthly sessions basically for years. And so I was able to attend the sessions at first and, learn how to chart. And then within, a short while I took a training course and I was teaching women. So I think that, that's kind of what has brought me to this place today, because since I learned about this information at such a young age, I was able to take it for granted basically all through my 20s. And then when I started having kids, so when I had my first son basically on my 30th birthday, that's really when things changed for me, because I kind of looked around and realized how many women were struggling with fertility challenges. And even though I had been able to take this information for granted for over 10, 15 years, your average woman still doesn't know how her body works, how her cycle works, how to identify the fertile window, and even some of the basic things that we all should know about preparing for pregnancy and all those types of things. So here we are.
Yeah, I'm super excited because, I've talked on here before, Vito and I, we're kind of in that phase of wanting to try to conceive, but due to some health stuff that I'm going through and just us wanting to be our healthiest, we're not quite there yet. So I'm super excited the information that you have, because anything to learn about how to prepare myself and get to know my body more and be able to do my part, I'm super excited about, because I know that I feel like a lot of times if something's not working, we just kind of look for something to fix it instead of diving a little bit deeper, which is what I'm super excited to do today.
Awesome.
Yeah. Did you have a long day at work, a tough day at school, or a tough day parenting your children? Treat yourself and your family to the meal that you deserve and have your favorite restaurants come to you with DoorDash. Your sweatpants are on for the day, but you're sick of the microwave leftovers and frozen pizza. Enter DoorDash, restaurant quality food with a living room dress code. You get to choose whatever you want. I had a bunch of people over a while ago. We actually ordered from 3 different restaurants. And I was out of town last week and Vito did not know what to eat for dinner on his own. And I actually ordered DoorDash from him. I was in Orlando. He was home and I ordered Wingstop for him to come to the house because I love taking care of him, but I was out of town, so I couldn't. But DoorDash did it for me, which was awesome. So they are an amazing company. They connect you to your favorite restaurants in your city, and ordering is easy. You open the DoorDash app, choose what you want to eat, and your food will be delivered to you wherever you are. Not only is your favorite pizza joint already on DoorDash, but there are over 340,000 restaurants in 3,300 cities. So you might find a new favorite too. With door-to-door delivery in all 50 states and Canada, hear that, Canadians? We gotcha. Order from your local to-goes or choose from your local or from your favorite international restaurants like Chipotle, Wendy's, Chick-fil-A, the Cheesecake Factory. And don't worry about dinner. Let dinner come to you and your family with DoorDash. And right now I have an awesome offer for you guys. Our listeners can get $5 off their first order of $15 or more when you download the DoorDash app and enter promo code MAMAS. That's $5 off your first order when you download the DoorDash app from the App Store and enter promo code MAMAS. Don't forget, that's promo code MAMAS for $5 off your first order from DoorDash. So let's talk about preparing for pregnancy. I listened to your podcast on it and I was on a run and I was like, dang it, because I kept wanting to stop and take notes because the whole time I'm like, oh, this is so good. This is so good. But you talk about 4 ways to prepare for pregnancy, and I would love to discuss those with you.
Off the top of my head, I would have to look up what my topics were there, but I'm sure that I'll talk about the exact same things. I
have them written down too.
Okay. Yeah, we could go through them. Well, why don't you share what they are? And
okay.
Then for all the listeners, then we'll go through them.
Well, the first one is if you're on birth control, giving your body time to adjust after. So if you've been on a type of birth control, a hormonal birth control, to give your body time to adjust. And then what I loved in your podcast is how you talked about nutrition for men and for women. But the way that you described it, you looked at, these ancient cultures that had super healthy babies, and it's where the ancient wisdom meets Western medicine and science, or science, So we're anxious. What is it? Ancient wisdom meets Western science. Was that the phrase?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Western science.
Yes.
So I loved that.
Well, let's start. We could start at the birth control part. That's something that I talk about a lot. Obviously, I talk about a lot on the podcast. I wrote a lot about it in the Fifth Vital Sign. And when it comes to preparing for pregnancy, I think it's really helpful to know how birth control can affect your fertility, because often what we're told is that it has no effect and it's very benign. And basically the idea that we're left with is that you can go off of birth control and you will just get pregnant right away, kind of thing. And also I remember kind of my lack of education as a teenager as well. So in my junior high school sex ed class, again, I was left with the impression that I was fertile every single day, which is not true. There's a small window of fertility in each cycle. And I was also left with the impression that basically I would just get pregnant. So coming from that kind of education, if that's what you want to call it, a lot of women, including myself, felt terrified of pregnancy. And so it's kind of like we spend our, teens and 20s actively preventing pregnancy because we're just under this constant threat of, oh my gosh, we think we're fertile every single day because we're not really taught about our cycles. But we're not taught about how our fertility changes with age. And we're not taught about the transition period that our body goes through post-pill. Mm-hmm. So when you look at what the research has to say, it's really interesting because the research shows that, the pill, once you come off the pill, there's a temporary period of subfertility. So there's nothing to indicate that this would be a permanent thing. But for anywhere from 6 to 12 to even 18 months or more, statistically speaking, you're less likely to conceive during that time. And even if you do conceive immediately off of birth control, you're at an increased risk of miscarriage kind of right out of the gate. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So, one, just to kind of put into perspective, there was a study that I looked at that looked at different types of birth control. So it looked at the most common, which is combined estrogen, synthetic estrogen, progestin contraceptive. So like the pill, the patch, the ring, all of those things kind of fall into that category, as well as like the shot. And so kind of it just compared the time to pregnancy. And so you had the control group, which was women who were not on hormonal birth control. So maybe they were using condoms or something like that, compared to, say, the women who were coming off the pill. And so for the women who just were not using any hormones, it took an average of 4 months for them to get pregnant when they started trying. So when they took off the condom. Mm-hmm. And then for women who were using the pill, it took an average of 8 months for them to conceive. And then for the women who were on the shot, if anyone isn't aware, has kind of the longest effect. So it takes the longest to recover. And so on average, it was taking about 18 months.
Wow.
And I think when you look at the research, there's often the way that they talk about it is very dismissive. So because it is reversible and eventually it does, the fertility does return and all of those types of things, it's very much like it's no big deal. But I think you and I both know that for a woman, so, you've been preventing pregnancy actively your whole life. You were living under the impression that you could get pregnant at the drop of a dime, and you would get pregnant immediately. Like, you were so terrified. You go off the pill thinking that you'll get pregnant right away.
Because you're ready
totally
now.
Fine. You're ready now. Yeah. You had to create the situation. Mm-hmm. So for a lot of us, it's like careers. Okay. Check, guy. Okay. Check. Like, you've done all of the things you know what I mean? Like, I did everything right. Mm-hmm. So you're ready for the baby now. And one of the things I often talk about too is that we can go from actively terrified of getting pregnant, like actively avoiding, to, okay, I want to get pregnant within a cycle. Like, it really, mm-hmm. We just go from 0 to 10, like emotionally, it's just how it works. So the first cycle, you don't get pregnant, you're fine. Because you're like, you know what? I was on the pill for 10 years. I get it. But even by the second cycle that you're not pregnant, your period comes, you start to freak out a little. So by the time you get to month 8 or month 9 or month 10 or month 11 or whatever, you're already freaking out. You're getting IUI. Like, you know what I mean? You're already at the fertility clinic. So I think the first step to preparing for pregnancy is to first understand that the pill is another hormonal birth control associated with a temporary delay in the return of normal fertility. It can take anywhere from 9 to 12 cycles for your cycles just to normalize and to become within the normal parameters. And 9 to 12 cycles is not necessarily 9 to 12 months, because it can sometimes take 2-3 months for your first period to come back. So this process of transition can take anywhere from 12 to 18 months. So I'm not saying this to scare anybody, but we prepare for our weddings. I remember I took like a year and a half to plan this wedding. We prepare for our careers. We go to school. We do our research. We do all of these things. And so when it comes to having babies, I just think we should have the opportunity to do that. So if anyone's listening right now and is kind of in that position of like, you know, maybe you're in a relationship and you have this kind of idea in the future that you're going to, you know, whether it's someone to get married in 6 months or whatever it is, I think it's really helpful for us to actually start thinking about that. And my suggestion would be to come off the pill anywhere from 18 months to 2 years or more. But the reason that I suggest such a long period of time is because you don't really know how your body's going to react. You don't know how long it's going to take for your period to come back. And especially if you were on the pill specifically for problems, like if you were put on the pill because you didn't know when your period was coming, because you had some actual issues, the pill doesn't solve those issues. It kind of manages those symptoms so that but it doesn't actually resolve them. So I'm kind of rambling, but if you're in that category, this information is especially important for you, because it can take a bit longer for your cycles to normalize if you had these problems before you started on the pill in the first place.
Yeah, I love what you say, though, about, you prepare for your career, you go to school, you learn, or you study a trade, whatever it is. But when it comes to, like, getting married and having kids, it's like a lot of people, they're like, oh, I met the person, I'm getting married, whereas like premarital counseling can be so valuable. And there's so much you can do to invest in your partner and in yourself to be a great partner. And same with becoming a parent. I think a lot of women just have that longing, like, I'm ready to be a mom. I'm ready. And I'm sure, you're going to be an amazing mom. But it is overlooked preparing your body, because that's what your vessel, that's what you're going to be using to create this life. That's what you're going to be using to carry this child and bring them into the world. And you should definitely have the opportunity to prepare your body for it. And it isn't an instantaneous thing, like you're saying. Like, when you get pregnant, it is a miracle. Like, the stars aligned, everything happened, and you got pregnant. So, I think, that is something that it's like, okay, yeah, I'm ready. Let's get pregnant. Let's do this. And then the heartbreak comes because it doesn't happen right away, because you're ready now. Like you said, you've been preventing. You're like, I'm not ready. I don't want to do it. So I'm taking all these steps to make sure I'm not pregnant yet. Okay, now I'm ready. Let's get pregnant. And it doesn't happen right away. And it can be heartbreaking. But if people don't know this information, being like, leading up to it, having that chance to prepare their body, then, I think that makes such a huge difference.
Well, I think it's important to point out as well that some women do get off the pill and get pregnant right away.
Yes.
And they, carry the baby to term and have a lovely baby. So this isn't to say that it can't happen. Because, for example, for women who are coming off the pill for other reasons, maybe they're just wanting to look into their health, or maybe they're just wanting to, start cycling for a while before they're ready to start trying, or whatever the case is. When I'm working with women who are coming off the pill, I'm actively encouraging them to avoid pregnancy, to, find a way to manage their fertility, because any cycle where ovulation occurs, you can get pregnant. So I think it's important to also point out, because there are women who are probably listening right now who came off the pills, and did get pregnant, and maybe they're now worried, because when you talk about some of the reasons why this is also important, in addition to the fact that it could just take a bit longer, is that one of the things the pill is known for is depleting nutrients. And it just happens to be a lot of the nutrients that we require when we are trying to build healthy babies. So the pill is known to deplete folate, and we know how important folate is for neural tube development. The pill is known to deplete other vitamins, including vitamin B12 and B6, and a ton of other, nutrients, including selenium and magnesium and zinc and coenzyme Q10, which for any woman who's been trying to conceive for a while knows that that's implicated in egg quality and sperm quality. So there's a lot of nutrients that the pill depletes. But I think it's important to remember as well that, everything doesn't always have to be perfect in order for pregnancy to happen. This is kind of for the same reason that we have insurance when we drive cars, for the same reason that we plan ahead and we want to be prepared. As women, I just feel like it's important for us to know that there are things that we can do to prepare our bodies for pregnancy to make it more likely that pregnancy will happen, when we're ready for it, that our bodies will be ready for it. One of the things I can say as a parent of 2 children, age 3 and 6, is that pregnancy can be really hard on your body. And so taking time to prepare, it's not just for baby. Of course, we all want to have the healthiest babies possible, but it's also for us. So if you go into pregnancy and you have not taken the time to replete your micronutrient stores, you're going into pregnancy potentially with low iron or low B vitamins or, whatever the case is. Pregnancy is one of those times of your life when I always compare it to kind of a bank account. So it might seem like a silly analogy, but you want to go into pregnancy with a full bank account because it's the one time of your life where really the only thing that's happening is withdrawals. So it's really incredible. Your body creates this tiny human. And I remember when I had my first son and I looked down at him. So I had him at home, delivered him in the birthing tub, like TMI, but whatever. And I looked down at him and I was like, where did you come from? And it really hit me at that point that everything I ate, everything I had done up until this point is what my body had used to create him. So, it's, we talk about postpartum depression and how challenging it can be, motherhood. And, so we really want to, in addition to just supporting our bodies to be the healthiest that they can be, to really think about also, once you have the baby, you're that baby's mom. And if you don't have any energy and, so we want to make sure that you are also as healthy as you possibly can be going into pregnancy.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a guest on a couple weeks ago, Dr. Christina Valentine, and she's a neonatologist, and she talked about how she has spent most of her career studying the baby, the infant, and she said recently it's shifted to studying the mom and how important the nutrition is even at conception, and how that plays an impact in the role of the baby's health as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and after the baby comes, if you plan to nurse your baby, if you plan to breastfeed, and then also if you plan to have another baby, a lot of us, so the current trend, for a lot of us, because we're waiting until everything is aligned to have babies, we typically starting later. And so then we have a baby and then we have another baby and then we might have another baby within a very short period of time. And if we're not thinking about ourselves and taking that time and care to replenish our nutrient stores, it can really cause seemingly unrelated health problems. But for, a lot of women, if you think about when those, when did my thyroid go out of whack? And when did I start having, when you started having kids. And one of it's not to say that it's so simple, but it has to kind of get on our radar that this is a very special period of our life that requires an extraordinary amount of energy. And our body's doing this amazing, miraculous thing. It really is. And so the good news is that, so when you're thinking about what to do to prepare for pregnancy, we can do more than just take our prenatal vitamins. Currently, our medical system, that's basically it, right? And again, the prenatal vitamins are for women, so it's only, it's like as women, we're told to take our prenatals just to make sure we get our folate, and then that's all we need to do. If you look at the research, one of the things that was really interesting is only about 20% of women go into pregnancy with sufficient iron reserves. That's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. But one of the things I talk about in the fifth vital sign is just the importance of having that in our minds, a period of preconception care. So in addition to thinking about our birth control choices and, seeing whether or not it makes sense for us to come off of the pill ahead of time to give our bodies and our cycles some time to kind of rebound and to recover. One of the important things that we can do is take a period of at least 6 to 12 months and really focus on concentrated nutrition. So to really give our bodies what we need for pregnancy, thinking of both baby and ourselves so that we don't end up completely depleted of these nutrients after birth.
Right. No, absolutely. I feel like, to me, before I started doing some of this research, I started thinking, okay, when we decide to plan to conceive, I'll eat really healthy that month. That was, you know what I mean? Like, okay, that month I'll eat really healthy. But going into it more, I'm realizing I need to prepare my body beforehand, because it does affect your recovery as well. And I also don't want people to think you have to have a perfect diet and all these things, because nobody has a perfect diet. I'm not saying that you have to cut out pasta, everything, whatever, but it's knowing the nutrient dense food sources that your body needs to get you the good iron stores, to get you the folate, to get you vitamin D and A and all the different things that you need, because your baby is literally going to suck it all out of you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what's interesting about what you said as well, it's kind of how we think about a lot of things, right? Like, we don't necessarily think that these things are going to take time, or to even give ourselves the time to build up our stores and things like that. What's really interesting is that there's several things that are already happening before many of us would know that we're even pregnant. So for women who are charting their cycles, like if you're actively charting and you can identify your fertile window and you can pinpoint, your approximate date of ovulation on your charts, then you'll know pretty early on. So, both times that I conceived, we were trying, so it wasn't a surprise. And I was able to tell because by the time my period was supposed to come, like that day, the temperature was continuing to go up. So I knew, okay, I was pregnant. But let's just put into perspective. So, by the time you're, say, like 4 or 5 weeks pregnant, and so it's interesting for those of the listeners who might not know, you're considered to be 1 week pregnant the week that you get. So they take it from the first day of your last period. So you're already like a week pregnant. Before you're pregnant. So they kind of backdate it. So by the time you're 4 or 5 weeks pregnant, that means that you're 2 to 3 weeks post ovulation. And that's why, so even at that stage of being 4 or 5 weeks pregnant, a lot of women wouldn't even know they're pregnant. By then, your baby's heart is already formed and beating. So when we talk about the neural tube development, things like that, like we need the folate insufficient reserves in our bodies before we're pregnant, or those specific things don't form normally from the start. If you're deficient in, say, vitamin A, retinol, the type of vitamin A that we get from animal foods, we need sufficient levels of vitamin A in order to help support fetal heart development, lung development, eye development, ear development, and these things are already in process. So I don't say these things to scare anybody, because that's what happens, especially for the woman who's like 8 weeks pregnant right now and thinking, oh my gosh. So this is, there's always more that you can do wherever you're at, whether you're 2 months out from your wedding or whether you're 3 months into your pregnancy. Like there's always things that we can do and ways that we can support our health and our baby's health. But I feel like these are the pieces of the conversation that we need to know as women,
right? Because
at the end of the day, you want to feel empowered. You want to feel like there's something that you can do. Mm-hmm. So during that, you mentioned, preconception food, and I don't prescribe any particular diet. I don't, but one of the things that we can start to understand is what nutrients are required for optimal fetal development and where do they come from. Mm-hmm. So we know we need our B vitamins. So we already mentioned like vitamin B12, folate, choline. Folate and choline play an equal and crucial role in that neural tube development, visual, spatial, all of those types of things are really important. The highest sources of folate and choline that kind of naturally occur are in liver, mm-hmm. organ meats, eggs, and of course, leafy green vegetables. One of the things also crucial for fetal brain development, omega-3 fatty acids, a lot of us are aware of that. And where do we get that? Well, we get that from fish and seafood. fish eggs contain the highest concentration of omega-3 fatty acids, which is interesting because you mentioned, how in that podcast episode I talked about traditional cultures and how there's a lot. It's really interesting when you study ancestral populations and the practices that they had in order to ensure that they would have healthy babies. I'm a curious person, so I always thought to myself, like, what did people do before Whole Foods?
Right.
Vitamins were invented, between 100 and 200 years ago. It's not like they had vitamins at the health food store in the 1800s. So how did people have healthy babies, and how did people maintain their nutrient stores before we had vitamins? And so when you look at ancestral populations, what's really fascinating about being in the amazing time that we're in now is that we can match the science with these practices and try to understand why they did them, even if they wouldn't have had the same way to describe it. So a lot of these ancestral populations would feed pregnant women, fish, seafood, fish eggs, liver, organ meats.
Yeah.
And the list really goes on and on. We could talk about it a little bit more, but these are the foods that contain the high density nutrition that we actually need in order to maintain these stores.
Yeah.
Vitamin A is a really, we could talk a little bit more about that because a lot of women are actively told not to eat liver during pregnancy. But what's interesting is that there's no other time in our lives where our vitamin A requirement is higher than it is when we're growing babies. So there's a difference between eating liver, the food, and taking synthetic vitamin A supplements. So vitamin A supplements are associated when you take, there was a study that I cited in the Fifth Vital Sign where they compared women who ate liver to women who ate or who took vitamin A supplements. And so the women who took the supplements had upwards of 20 times the level of what's called teratogenic metabolites, the metabolites that are associated with birth defects, which is the reason why women are told not to, consume any vitamin A containing products. But what's interesting is that the women who ate the liver it wasn't the same. So a lot of the advice and information that we're being taught doesn't always match up to the science of what we need in order to have healthy babies.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is when you talk about the ancestral cultures and, back in the day, it's not like our culture now, like where you go to the supermarket and you're like, oh, I only want a filet mignon cut. Like back in the day, they used the organ meats. They used everything. If they killed an animal, they did eat the organ meats. They used every part of it. And I also feel like, I don't know, that takes me down a whole nother rabbit hole of how we're very wasteful these days, I guess, of like different things. But, I think they were more mindful of what they hunted and then how they used it and how they let those parts like nourish their bodies. Now I feel like most people, including myself, it's like you eat for taste and enjoyment, not necessarily for nutrient dense foods. You like try to squeeze in those vegetables and, but then it was, because you had to, like, that's your survival. That's what would keep you strong. That's, what kept your society going. So I think it's super interesting how when you go back and look, those were the foods that they were eating. That is how like the pregnant women were nourishing their bodies and themselves. So let's get to men though, because so women, we take on so much of the role, right? It's our fault we can't get pregnant. It's our fault, whatever, everything, So even from before, it's like, oh, you're PMSing, whatever, So so much of the blame, I feel like we live in this culture, women have a hard enough time. We blame ourselves for a lot. So, but there's so much that men can do to take ownership and responsibility in fertility. So let's talk about that.
Well, yeah, it's just a really interesting time that we're living in. I think the first thing is that as women, we don't ever consider our partners to even if we're struggling with fertility challenges, it's really not what we're even thinking about. We're always thinking that if there is something happening or if I'm not getting pregnant, it must be me. My body must be broken. And so I think it's important to recognize that there is a global sperm problem that is bigger than you and your relationship. So over the past 70 to 80 years, the average man's sperm count and quality has declined by anywhere from 60% to even 70%. So when you look at, again, kind of going back to the research, your average man in the 1940s had a sperm concentration of about 113 million sperm per milliliter, which sounds like a lot of sperm, millions of them. Right. But the average man today has anywhere from maybe 40 to 50 million sperm per milliliter. So that's a huge drop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and what's interesting too is that what we've done is just changed what's normal. So, you know what I mean? Like they just changed the lab values based on the average population. So, in 2010, the World Health Organization put out a document that basically outlined what would be considered to be normal. And so they basically created the kind of like this lower limit of what is considered to be normal.
Normal for now.
So, well, I don't think it can get much lower than that, to be honest with you. But so the sperm concentration of 15 million sperm per milliliter is, so if your partner's sperm is above that, he's totally fine, is what the document basically says. And morphology, 4%. Or higher is great. So one of the things that I often find myself when I'm working with clients who are trying to conceive, and we're kind of going through all of the possible things that could be, related, to kind of talk about that, like to flesh it out. So if your partner's morphology is 4% and your doctor has told you that that's totally fine, which is what I hear a lot, fine, everything's fine, it means that out of every 100 sperm he produces, only 4 are normal. So morphology refers to the shape of the sperm. So, when you think of a sperm, you're thinking of like a round head and a wiggly little tail. But when a sperm has poor morphology, then that would mean that maybe the sperm has no head, or maybe the head is malformed, or maybe there's no tail, or maybe there's like a short tail. But basically, when you look at them, they don't look anything like what you would think a sperm would look like. And that also means that they're incapable of fertilizing an egg. And it also means, so not to go on a tangent, but I'll just put it out there that your cervical mucus actively filters out poor sperm. So sperm that have poor motility, so the sperm that can't swim properly, they can't swim through the mucus. It's like a physical barrier for them, because the mucus is thick enough that you have to have decent more motility to swim through. And then also our cervical fluid also screens out the sperm of poor morphology. So lots more detail
oh my
than
gosh, that
we'll
is
go
so
into
amazing.
Today. But
that's
yeah,
so
so
cool.
in our fertile window, we're producing cervical fluid. So for any of the listeners, it looks sometimes like stretchy, raw, clear egg whites. And it can also look like creamy white hand lotion. And we produce that as we approach ovulation, and it can keep sperm alive for up to 5 days. And it's a sign of fertility, because when we're not making our mucus, the sperm can't survive in our bodies because our vaginas are naturally really acidic and they just killed them. But in addition to that, so basically if your partner has really low morphology or like poor sperm quality, there's very few sperm that could make it, and they would have to actually kind of make it through all the crappy sperm, for lack of a better word. So it's a big problem. Let's just put it that way. It's a big problem. And so the good news is that there's a lot of things that you can do if you've identified that your partner has poor sperm quality, but also before you're even trying, in addition to, as a woman, kind of taking the time and opportunity to consume those high nutrient density foods and to make sure that you're, replenishing all the nutrients that you need in order to prepare for pregnancy, he can do the exact same thing. And traditional cultures knew this because it wasn't just a thing that women did. There were special diets for both men and women in order to improve sperm quality.
Wow.
And there's also a lot of lifestyle pieces. So one of the things that I think is really important in general is that if you are trying to conceive for a while and you have learned a bit about your cycle and you are timing correctly and it's not happening, it's a good idea to get the sperm tested right off the bat, instead of waiting, because you can improve sperm quality naturally, but when your partner ejaculates today, that is basically a printout of his health about 3 months ago. So it takes about 74 days, but it takes about 3 months or so for the sperm to develop. So from beginning to end. So although men make sperm every day and they have sperm all the time, like when he's ejaculating, that's quite literally sperm that started developing 3 months ago. So in order to make a real change in the sperm quality, 4 to 6 months is a good period of time to give yourself. And then when you've been trying to conceive for a year already, just to find out later on that his sperm quality is poor, that means an additional 6 months. That can be a lot to take. That can be really frustrating, obviously. So that's kind of like before we even, like, this is why it's important. So if you're already, okay, we know we're going to start trying in 6 months or in the spring or whenever, then now would be the time. What are the things that can affect sperm negatively? Similar to the things that can affect our health negatively. If your partner smokes cigarettes or marijuana, for example, that is known to reduce sperm quality, count, morphology, all of those things. If he drinks a lot, so it's not to say he can never have a beer or whatever, but it's important to know that if he drinks a lot or frequently or regularly, one of the things he could do is just lay off of it for a bit. So similar to, it's like all the stuff that we know but don't always do. Eating whole foods, like not like trying to kind of reduce the amount of processed foods, sugar, like all that kind of stuff. So that's just a general thing. If your partner has a job that requires him to sit for extended periods of time or likes to hot tub and sauna, it's not just a wives' tale. So especially for women who have done this, so for anyone who's listening who has already done the sperm analysis and they know already that, okay, the sperm was a little bit poor or a lot poor, some of these things are helpful just to kind of look to see, because sometimes when you have a really poor sperm analysis, then you can kind of start to identify, oh, well, he's got these habits, so maybe we can kind of ease up on some of those things. So those are some of the general things. And also if, for all of us, reducing our xenoestrogen, like our chemical exposure, so colognes, lotions, all of those, everything that has a smell, laundry detergent, it's like this is usually a big thing, but like laundry detergents, dishwashing, like all of the things that have dyes and fragrances and all those things, all of those products contain chemicals that mimic estrogen in the body. And when you're trying to make sperm, you want to support his testosterone production in any way that you can. And then in addition to that, there's a lot of very specific nutrients that have been shown to be crucial for normal sperm development, including preformed vitamin A, so retinol, folate and zinc, coenzyme Q10, vitamin C's, omega-3 fat, so the same kind of things, vitamin D. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but I would say the first step would just be to acknowledge that his contribution is crucial. That there's this global issue that we know about, that a lot of women are struggling to conceive. And it's male factor infertility is responsible up to 40%, 40 to 50% of the time. Yeah. So this is a big deal, ladies. It's not just us. And if your partner has poor sperm quality, it can actually contribute to your risk of miscarriage. So if you miscarry, you think it's my fault, my body's, you know what I mean? Like we all kind of do this, and it's not about blame, but it's just to know that his sperm can be a factor in your miscarriage. So we have to recognize this is a big deal. Yeah.
You're in it together. You both created the baby. And I love though that it is on both people, I guess, even good, healthy babies, I feel like you kind of always see men are just proud. They literally just come inside of you and they're like, oh, I did my part. I'm a man. That's what we're taught, right? It's like, oh, he's like, yeah, I did my part. The rest is on her basically. So, that was my contribution to the world. So, that is super important to know. But you said that a lot of that you hear is like, oh, that's fine. That's fine. So what would be the percentage if somebody got their sperm tested where it's like, okay, I need to make some changes? Is it the morphology at 4%?
Well, so what's interesting, and I'm glad that you brought that up, is that when you have that kind of low bar that was set by the World Health Organization, the doctor is potentially looking for a different, the doctor's looking for a different thing. There's a difference between the very minimal that we need in order to have a successful IUI or IVF procedure versus what we would need to have optimal chances of conception.
Right.
I think we can all appreciate like natural conception, like birds and bees, penis and vagina. There's a different bar for what would be optimal for natural conception versus what is IUI. The very minimal we need in order to do a medical procedure. And so this is why this is problematic. When you look at what the research has to say in terms of what would be kind of the minimal optimal for conception, there's a study that I quote in the fifth vital sign in the preconception section where it was more like 50 million, like a minimum of 50 million sperm per milliliter concentration, a minimum of 15% or so morphology. So what that means, 15 out of every 100 are normal. So we still have 85 out of the 100 that are abnormal. But optimal for conception would be the 15% morphology or more. And then the optimal motility, which we didn't talk about a ton, but it just means the sperm that are actually like motile. They have normal, I keep doing this thing with my hand that none of the listeners can hear, but they have the normal motion with their with the flagellum and, but 68% motility. So that number is very different than the low bar. And what I can confidently say is that I would say, when we're looking at it from the lens of preconception nutrition, there's no one out there that doesn't have to potentially, up their game a bit during that 6 to 12 month preconception period. So there's no man that shouldn't be looking at his habits, seeing if, he can, whatever it is, like reduce the alcohol consumption a little bit or, making sure he's getting good sleep, making sure that he's getting in the key nutrients that we know are crucial for sperm development. So one of the reasons why I talk a lot about liver and organ meats is because liver is not a vitamin A supplement. Liver, pound for pound, contains the highest concentration of vitamin A, folate, zinc, vitamin B12, iron. It's very high in coenzyme Q10. And what's interesting is, anyone who's been struggling with fertility challenges, that's one of the most expensive supplements. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with supplementation or not supplementation, but if you've ever been curious as to what foods, like where could I get this from food, that's one of the reasons why these traditional cultures consume them. Not that they knew in the way that we're talking about it now with the research and the vitamins and the names, but they knew that when, this was how, when you ate this way, it lent itself to healthier babies. And just thinking about how can I build my stores of vitamin B12? How can I build my stores of folate and choline? How can I build those stores of omega-3 fatty acids for brain development? How can I do those things ahead of time? And so there's not only one way to do it, but I think it's just important to start having those conversations. And what the other thing I'll just say is that I have yet to work with a couple who has been trying to conceive for, quite a while. So anywhere from 6 months to 12 years or more, or 12 months or more, sorry. So 6 months to 12 months or more. So trying for a while, whose partners had perfect sperm, like whose partners hit all three, the morphology, so sometimes you'll have a man with really high, like I've seen this a lot, where let's say his sperm is like 80 million sperm per milliliter. So because the number's so high that it's like, they'll just say it's amazing and they won't even look at the morphology number. But you can have a really high sperm count and have like 3% morphology. And that basically means that you have very, very few sperm that can do anything. And that can still cause you to struggle with conception,
Yeah.
even if the number is really, really high. But like the number can be high, but if none of them can fertilize, and like I always get really frustrated about this topic, as you can tell.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And hearing you talk, how the rate of good sperm has dropped. All I can think about is The Handmaid's Tale now. I don't know if you watched that show. Because it's about,
I've heard about it though.
like infertility, basically, because we screwed up our bodies and everyone's like infertile, and so having kids is really hard. But so I mean that's super crazy. It's crazy how those numbers are so drastic. So I want to talk about then in that podcast that I had listened to, you talked about getting to know our bodies. So yes, nutrition plays a vital role, letting your body kind of normalize off of birth control, but also learning to track your cycles and how most of us so I have a cycle tracking app that I use, and it says when I ovulate, right? And it's always like around day 14. And that's not necessarily true because I also do check out my cervical mucus, and I can definitely tell when I'm ovulating because it's kind of that way for a few days. It'll slowly like increase, and then it's way thicker. And then, and it's usually around, but it's not necessarily when the app says today's your ovulation day, because it always says it's on day 14-ish, and my body is not necessarily a day 14-ish ovulator. So how do we you had mentioned something about like your body's not a machine,
Yeah,
so
I say that a lot.
It's like, if you're trying to conceive, how do you learn? I guess give us like a couple of tips of how to be more in tune with your body and learn how to properly track your cycles.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that question. I think in general, it's important to bust some of the myths because that's what holds us back, I would say, from having a better understanding of our bodies. So the most common myth is that the menstrual cycle is always 28 days and ovulation always happens on day 14. And so a lot of the, I think that that's just how it is. And it's interesting because the average menstrual cycle, when you look at studies that look at hundreds or thousands of women's menstrual cycles, the average menstrual cycle does fall around 29 days or so. But there's variation. And so the menstrual cycle can vary. A healthy cycle can vary anywhere from about 24 days in length to 34, 35 days. Once it starts to get up there, we want to take a look at that because we would want to just take a look at some of the reasons why the ovulation is delayed and why the cycle is long. But there is variation. I've worked with women who are so concerned. My cycle is 32 days, what's wrong with me? And when we look at the cycle, it's completely fine. I've also worked with women whose cycles are 28 days, but when you look at the parameters, there's actually an issue there. So in order to identify when is the best time in your cycle to have sex and to conceive, I think when you're doing it, when you're monitoring your own cycles, the most important thing to look at is cervical mucus in order to identify what is the best time to have sex. We talked about some of the reasons why that is already. So cervical mucus, we produce it as we approach ovulation. It keeps sperm alive for up to 5 days. So this is a really important thing because one of the biggest myths about the cycle and timing is that we're supposed to have sex on ovulation day and that's what the goal is. And so we're all trying to figure out when ovulation day is and try to have sex on that day. But if you can understand the role of cervical mucus, then you can understand that it's actually not about, it doesn't hurt to have sex on ovulation day, but the goal is to have sex when you have your cervical mucus present. So, for example, if you're charting your cycles, you're paying attention, you're looking for your cervical fluid, and then you notice on Monday that you've got this, clear, stretchy fluid. So as I mentioned, some women will see it's like raw egg whites, clear. Some women will see it's like creamy hand lotion. And some women don't necessarily have a lot, so they don't have enough to be able to play with it between their fingers. But when they go to the bathroom, as they approach ovulation, they'll notice that it feels really slippery when they wipe themselves. So either, is okay, and they're all fertile. So whatever it is that you're seeing on the Monday, you see your cervical fluid and you're like, wow, this is awesome. So you have sex. And then your partner has to go out of town for business or something, or pleasure, whatever, but he's not there anymore. But you didn't ovulate on Monday. So you had your mucus on Monday, you had sex on Monday, and then let's say you ovulate on Friday, but he's still not there because he's away. So it's possible for you to conceive, to get pregnant on Friday, even though you had the sex on Monday, because the mucus keeps the sperm alive for up to 5 days. And I use such a specific example because I feel over the years I've learned that I have to paint a picture because we have, in order for us to really get it. So the most important thing to pay attention to when you're trying to have a baby is your cervical fluid, and have sex when you see it. So a lot of women are using the ovulation predictor kits, which are awesome. I mean, they give you an additional way to kind of track what's going on, but it's important to know how they work. So ovulation predictor kits are testing for the LH, luteinizing hormone surge. And the way that your body works is that you have your period, and in a healthy cycle, it's typically an average of 4 to 5 days or so, but it can be anywhere from 3 to 7 days. And then as your period stops, you start approaching ovulation. So then as you approach ovulation, the eggs in your ovaries are developing, they're making estrogen, and it's the estrogen that stimulates your cervix to make this really cool cervical mucus. And then once the estrogen hits its peak, kind of that highest point, then that sends a feedback loop to your brain. So then your pituitary releases luteinizing hormone, and that's what triggers ovulation. So the ovulation predictor kit is measuring for the surge of luteinizing hormone. Your body releases that anywhere from 24 to 36 hours before ovulation. So you get this surge, but ovulation isn't instant. And there's some conditions and some situations where you might have that surge, but maybe then something happens and your body doesn't ovulate. There are some women who, for example, women with PCOS who have an elevated LH, elevated luteinizing hormone is one of the signs. So you can have, so what I'm saying is it's not infallible. You can be testing your ovulation, but some women are going to test it and be like, why do I have this positive every single day? I'm not ovulating. And that could be a sign, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then other women can have the surge and then they have sex, but maybe ovulation is then delayed a little bit longer or something like that. So my best advice when you're trying to have a baby is to start tracking your cycles. Start to notice what your body does around ovulation, what your cervical mucus looks like. Take your temperature. Your temperature will rise and stay high after ovulation. So, start doing that. And don't wait for a positive test. Don't have sex on day 14 and assume that that's going to correlate to ovulation. Just pay attention to what your body's actually doing, your mucus. And that is the best thing that you could do when you're trying to get pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I always assumed that when my mucus was thicker, that's when I was ovulating. So I was wrong.
Well, it's a sign that you're approaching ovulation.
Right. But it doesn't mean that's necessarily my ovulation day.
No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. So there's a couple ways, this is how you tell when you've ovulated. So, when you're looking at your cervical mucus, after you ovulate, what happens is the egg bursts out of your ovary. So you've got quite literally a scar on your ovary because it just burst open. And then what happens is that heals and it becomes what's called the corpus luteum, and that makes progesterone. So until you ovulate, you don't make progesterone in significant quantities. After you ovulate, you make progesterone, you produce quite a significant amount of it, and that progesterone shuts down your mucus production. So when you're watching your mucus, so in your case, you're like, oh, cool, it's coming, it's getting thicker, but then eventually you're going to stop seeing the clear, stretchy stuff, or you're going to stop feeling that kind of slippery sensation. And once that has dried up and gone away, that means that you've ovulated. So you can look back and say, okay, the mucus dried up here, So you ovulated then around that time. You can take it a step further by taking your basal body temperature. So that's your waking temperature. So first thing in the morning before you get out of bed every morning, you take your temperature, put it in your app or on your paper chart or whatever the case is. And so, the most accurate way to confirm exactly when ovulation happened would be an ultrasound done daily so you can verify. But since I don't know anyone who has an ultrasound machine in their house, so the basal body temperature is the next best thing. And so, because I've had women say, well, it's not, for the fertility awareness educators who know, they're like, okay, but it's not, you can't tell exactly. But when your temperature goes up and stays high, you can be fairly certain that you ovulated the day before. And I feel like that's pretty amazing to be able to pinpoint ovulation to that close of a degree in your house for basically free.
Yeah. I need to start taking my temp. I have a quick question that I guess kind of has nothing to do with this, maybe a little bit, going back to birth control. So if you're coming off of a hormonal birth control because you want to start, you're planning to try to conceive in a couple years, a year or two, but you don't want to not be on anything, so condoms are one of the, I guess you said if used right, they're 98% effective.
Correct.
But I just read this on your Instagram and I'm a little freaked out because I don't do well with any types of lubes. So I use coconut oil and we use condoms, and coconut oil can destroy the latex.
Oh yeah, you got to stop that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What?
There's a couple things that you can do in case you're skeptical of this concept. You could YouTube it. So just YouTube oil and condoms.
Oh no.
You could try it yourself.
Nope.
So put a condom over your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And then get your coconut oil and just rub it. You might have to do it depends on the condom. I did it. I have an online course, and one of the videos that I made was that. So in the birth control section of the course, I went through all the different types of birth control, and I talked about what's perfect use and all of that. And so I did a video, and of course I sped it up because it took about 2-ish minutes of me rubbing the coconut oil on the latex condom before it snapped. So this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that no one knows this. I guess I'm dating myself. I'm a child of the 80s. So when I was growing up, the message was, if you have sex, you're going to get AIDS and die. Literally, This was the 80s, right? And so condoms were the thing, and everything was use condoms. Condoms are effective. Condoms. And so we learned about condoms, and we learned about proper condom use. So for anyone who's listening, perfect use with a condom means that, the penis doesn't touch your body before you have the sex. You put the condom on. First of all, even before that, you get the correct size condom.
Mm-hmm.
Men have different sizes of shoes, so of course they're going to have different sizes of penis, and so
and
we have to get the condom
they think that they're a different size than they are because
but it has to actually fit. So there's condoms that are so men have different girth, right, and length. Mm-hmm. So there's condoms that are wider and thinner, so it shouldn't be falling off because obviously that's going to increase the chance of slippage. It shouldn't be too tight because that can also, what I mean, all of those things. So right size, make sure it's not expired. Open it, put it on the right way. Know how to put it on. You have to hold the tip so that there's space for the semen.
Yeah. If
you don't leave that space, then it could burst, and then you have to roll it down or whatever. But yeah, using correct lube is crucial. And what I'm thinking, because I've heard a lot of women say condoms don't work for me, they break all the time. But I'm starting to believe that part of the reason that the condoms are breaking is because people don't necessarily know that they can't use oil-based lubricants at all with latex condoms.
I was never taught. I mean, I grew up in Nebraska where sex education was not a thing. I wasn't required to take a course. I never took a class.
Oh, wow.
And that is still the majority of the states. So, and also condoms are the only form of birth control that also helps against STDs. So it's a super safe form. If it's done right, if you know how to put a condom on correctly, it's 98% effective. But yeah, I mean, I never knew about the oil. Thankfully, I haven't had the breakage situation, but I mean,
but I would stop using it if you're, especially in your fertile window when you're having sex. I wouldn't, no oil. It's just like literally just no. And YouTube it after we're done our call. And for all the listeners, I don't have a specific link for you, but there are people out there who do sex ed and do an amazing job. And so there are videos of people putting the oil on the condom and the condom breaking, in case you need to see it with your own eyes to understand that you can't use oil with condoms. And if you have allergies to lubricants, you still want to look for a water-based lubricant, but there are companies that put out lubes that don't contain parabens and synthetic flavor, whatever, but there are companies that put out water-based lubricants that are vagina friendly, and we should be looking for those anyways.
Yeah, I know. I think Uber Lube is a good one. I was recently taking a birth course, and the midwives there had it. Because I mean, for me, I would get super irritated really easy with anything else that I tried. So coconut oil was the only thing that I have found has worked, but it doesn't work if you're using condoms, apparently.
Yeah.
So.
And I think you can get away with it. I feel like that's a big thing, because you can get away with it for a while, because it's not like when I did the demo, I was using, maybe the condom itself was a bit thicker, because it also depends, like, right? Like all the differences. Yeah. Some condoms are thinner, obviously, to make it so that it's more pleasurable, and some are thicker, more durability, etc. But like, it took a while. It took a couple of minutes of me vigorously rubbing for it to break. So I think that you can get away with it for a while until you don't. Until you don't.
Oh no. I'm scared. I mean, I just have to stop using coconut oil. But so in your book, The Fifth Vital Sign, because as soon as I meant to order it before we got on the call, but I was distracted. So I'm going to order your book as soon as we hang up. What are we going to find out in your book, The Fifth Vital Sign, without giving it all away?
Well, I mean, it's impossible to give it all away. It's a 350-page book with over 1,000 research citations. But basically, the book, I mean, I called it The Fifth Vital Sign because in the book, I'm basically arguing that the menstrual cycle is a vital sign that we should be paying attention to. Mm-hmm. And so really briefly, the most commonly known and accepted vital signs include heart rate, respiratory rate, so blood pressure, body temperature. And we all know that if you go to the doctor and they measure your vitals, if your temperature is way too high or low, or if your blood pressure is off, it not only tells them that something is wrong, but it points them in a specific direction. The doctors know what could make your blood pressure too high or low, so they already know what they should be looking for. So in the same way that a doctor would be able to identify what's happening, and beyond just that there's something wrong, identify a very specific thing that could be going on, when you're working with someone who is knowledgeable in the menstrual cycle, it acts in very much the same way. So whether we're looking at the length of the menstrual cycle, the quality of your period, your cervical fluid, when ovulation is happening, and the amount of time between ovulation and your next period, we can really divide the cycle into different parts and glean a lot of information. I know for me personally, when I first started charting, my cycles were an average of 38, 45 days. And at first, again, post-high school feminist phase, this is me, I'm Lisa, and I have long cycles, because I thought that this was an expression of my individuality or something, only to be told by my charting instructor that I should be checked for thyroid because my temperatures were too low and my cycles were too long. And that was how a very subclinical thyroid issue was identified in my early 20s. So I think that, that is the basis and the part of the reason why I wrote the book, because we're often told that our cycles and our periods are just hassle. They're supposed to be painful, or it's normal for them to be painful. We're not taught that we can learn so much about our health from paying attention to our cycles. So in addition to that, of course, as a fertility awareness educator, I have a lot of information about charting, ton of information about cervical fluid and the crucial and fascinating role that it plays in fertility. I do talk a bit about birth control and how to manage the fertile window and things like that. as well as some of the most common conditions that can interfere with menstrual cycle that we can glean from paying attention to our cycles. And I go into a lot of detail about preparing for pregnancy, nutrition for optimal fertility, some of the things that we can do to support our bodies to make hormones and to have healthy cycles, deal with PMS, period pain, preconception care, and also sperm. Of course, I talk a lot about what we can do specifically to improve sperm quality and health. So all the things we talked about today and more.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Oh, and one more thing I should mention. Yes. 2 chapters on the birth control pill, all the research, side effects, so that we are able to make an informed decision about the drugs that we take.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's what I'm loving so much about doing this podcast, is bringing on different guests to educate us, just so that I really believe that education is power. And when you're educated, you feel empowered and you can make the best informed decisions for yourself. And that's all that we're trying to do. And any of the information, again, don't take it and look back and be like, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. It's like, no, just take the information and look forward and see how you can implement it in your future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where can people find you at?
Well, thank you for that. For the Fifth Vital Sign, the book is available on Amazon, and it's available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook format. So for those audiobook lovers, fertilityfriday.com/audible. And I'm around the podcast. I've been podcasting for 5 years now. Mm-hmm. It'll be 5 years this year, which is crazy, actually. So over 250 odd episodes of fertility awareness. So if this topic interests you, you can just put Fertility Friday in your favorite podcast player and find me there. My main website is fertilityfriday.com, and I'm on social media at Fertility Friday in a lot of places. So I'll see you around.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. I can't wait to order your book, especially since it's very reflective of where I'm at in my life right now. I'm trying to learn all this and try to figure out this fertility journey. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on here, and we will talk to you soon.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
Oh, shit. All right. I'm literally ordering the Fifth Vital Sign right now. I'm on Amazon Prime on my phone, ordering it. But I will give you guys the link to her information. I love that she's so passionate about this, and you can tell. And just, again, I don't want people to take this information, look back, just look forward with it. I feel like we always have room to improve in our lives. And that's what we're trying to do here, is just to learn and grow and improve ourselves. I know I have a long, long ways to go, especially just wanting to prepare for conception and trying to conceive. And I know that journey is not going to look perfect, and you can't wait for everything to be in perfect alignment for things to happen. And we understand that too. So I'm super excited to read her book. I will have her show notes up on my website, Elizabeth Joy. I will have information about her on the Instagram, Miraculous Mamas, the Facebook group, and anywhere else that you can find us at. And you guys, I have some exciting news. This week, we're going to have a bonus episode. It's going to be the first Miraculous Mamas bonus episode. And I have Dr. Patrick Flynn come back on. He goes over my test results. I have my sister on as well. And you guys, I'm not going to lie, the test results are pretty scary. I have a lot of work to do. And a lot of you have written me and asked me how the test results went, how things were going. So I did want to share. I didn't want to do a full another episode on a Monday with him, but I wanted to give you guys this bonus episode so you could hear what he had to say. I know some of you are in a similar boat as me, as maybe wanting to start trying to conceive soon, or you know that you have gut issues going on or hormonal imbalances and just not sure what they are. So I wanted to just be vulnerable and share it with you guys. But yeah, I definitely do find out some pretty shocking and scary news on the episode. So that will be out this week, a bonus episode. Super excited to be offering you guys some more content. So also, if you guys listen to this podcast, but you aren't subscribed, make sure that you hit that subscribe button. That helps get this podcast out there more, helps it be seen. Make sure that you share it with people who you know could benefit from it. I love this community that we're creating. I love the feedback that you guys are giving me and the relationships that are being developed. It's so cool. I've been able to talk to a lot of the moms in our group on the phone and have conversations and hear your birth stories. So I love this community, and thank you guys so much for being a part of it. Thank you for listening, and I will see you if you decide to stop in this week for the bonus episode. If not, I will see you next Monday. Bye. This podcast is brought to you by Wave Podcast Network. Check out all of our shows, including the Brain Candy Podcast, I Don't Get It, Coffee Convos, and Let's Talk About It.